So we'll go through again on the cAMP activation or cyclic AMP activation hormone mechanisms. So first, based on the figure, hormone bind to receptors. Receptors is located on the plasma membrane or on the surface of the plasma membrane. What happened on the surface of plasma membrane? There's a receptor, or known as GPCR or G protein coupled receptors. So that receptor is actually linked to G protein. So these actually G protein coupled receptors, that's very important. So because once the hormone binds to receptors, it will initiate or it will trigger signal transduction. Recall again on signal transduction. Signal transduction means signals, or it converts the hormone signal to intracellular signal. There are a couple of molecules. These molecules will relay the signals from one molecule to another molecule until it produces responses. Okay, then the G protein releases the GDP and replaces it with GTP. So once the GTP bound to the G protein means that it activates the G protein. Because bila GDP binds, it inactivates the G protein. So remember that GTP, another form of energy, when it binds to G protein, it will activate the G protein. So activates the G protein here. Then what happened next? The G proteins, which is activated, will then trigger or activate the enzyme adenylyl cyclase. So take note on the spelling of this adenylyl cyclase. So this adenylyl cyclase is very important because this enzyme that converts the ATP to the second messenger, which is the cyclic AMP or cAMP. Okay. So there are going to be a cascade of reactions that happened when the G protein or activated G protein activates the enzyme or the adenylyl cyclase. So you can see here that this enzyme is very important to catalyze the conversion of ATP to cAMP or cyclic AMP, the second messenger. Okay, next, there's a cAMP, the second messenger. Next, what it does, the cAMP activates the protein kinase. This is another type protein. If you look in the textbook, it will state protein kinase A and the protein kinase C. It depends on the type of protein kinase. So they activate the protein kinase, and then the protein kinase catalyze the phosphorylation of a specific protein. And after that, they activate the protein kinase, then there's going to be another specific protein that is responsible to trigger the response, the cellular response. So sebelum they trigger the cellular response, this protein kinase needs to catalyze dulu the phosphorylation of that particular protein before it alters the functions and leads to the response. What is phosphorylation? Phosphorylation is the addition of phosphate to the protein. And lastly, the cAMP or cyclic AMP is inactivated and converted back to AMP. Okay. This is the mechanism of cAMP or cyclic AMP, the second messenger. Okay, yeah? Are you okay? Can I proceed? So for this one, you can refer to the figures and you can refer to your notes as well for cAMP. Yang ni panjang sikit. Tapi nanti kita tengok yang the steroid hormone ataupun via hormonal mechanism via the gene activation, dia a bit shorter when you compare with this one. Are you okay? Can I proceed to the next mechanism of hormonal action? Boleh?
Boleh.
Okay. Now we look at the mechanism of hormone action via gene activation. Okay, there is a figure that's taken from Campbell textbook. So this is the secretory cell with the hormones in there. So once hormone is secreted from the cell, it will travel via the blood to the specific target cell. Okay, di blood kan dia bawa hormones ni. But these hormones, example, the lipid soluble hormone, example like testosterone or progesterone, this one is quite small and it's lipid soluble, so it can cross. You nampak eh? This one is a plasma membrane. This hormone boleh cross through. Okay, dia boleh masuk dalam. So Maksudnya receptors in the cell is not on the surface of the plasma membrane, but instead in the cell, in the target cell. The receptors can be located in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. So it can be either two. Sorry. Bila the hormone binds to the receptors in the cytoplasm, so dia akan form the hormone receptor complex. That hormone receptor complex then moves into the cell and akan trigger the transcription translation process. Okay? Okay, ni kan. Kalau let's say that dia doesn't bind to receptors in the cytoplasm, the hormones might as well can go straight to the nucleus. Dia boleh pergi nucleus juga sebab dekat dalam nucleus that is a receptor. You nampak sini receptor, dia bind to receptors and form the hormone receptor complex. Then the hormone receptor complex binds to the DNA, the double strand DNA, which comprises of 2 polynucleotide strands. So this, when it binds to DNA, it will trigger the transcription process. Transcription process is a process that converts the DNA to mRNA, which is a messenger RNA. mRNA is a single strand of polynucleotide strand. So you have this mRNA here. So then this mRNA will move to the cytoplasm and start with the synthesis of specific protein. So it will then continue with the next event, which is the translation process. So translation process, mRNA will convert into the protein. So this is the synthesis of specific protein. So you can see the mechanism of action via the gene activation is quite slow kalau you compare with the cAMP. Sebab cAMP memang you are dealing with the proteins, intact proteins in the cell. But for the gene activation, you need to synthesize a new protein. So it will take times for the synthesis of new protein. And it will be a bit slower and act slower when compared with the gene cAMP activation.